You are standing in a bathroom. You are staring at a small plastic stick. Two lines or one? A window or a blank? Your entire future balances on a strip of chemically treated paper. It takes 3 minutes, but the real answer to how humans have always known this is far stranger and far older than plastic or paper or even writing itself. Long before a hormone had a name, your ancestors were already reading the signs. They just used a different kind of test: barley, wheat, and urine. In Egypt, more than 3,000 years ago, a woman who suspected she was pregnant would soak 2 bags of grain in her urine every day, 1 bag of barley, 1 bag of wheat. If the barley sprouted first, tradition said the child would be a boy. If the wheat sprouted first, a girl. If neither sprouted at all, she was not pregnant. This was not superstition dressed up as guesswork. It was recorded medical procedure. The instructions survive today in the Kahun gynecological papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever found, written around 1800 BCE. And here is the strange part. When modern researchers tested this exact method in a laboratory using real urine samples from pregnant and non-pregnant women, the grain sprouted more reliably for the pregnant samples. Why? Because pregnancy raises estrogen levels, and elevated estrogen can encourage certain seeds to germinate faster. An ancient farming society with no concept of hormones had accidentally built a working biological assay. They didn't know what estrogen was, they just knew what grew. That should stop you for a second. Before microscopes, before blood tests, before anyone understood what a hormone even was, people were already detecting one, not through knowledge, through observation, repeated for generations, until the pattern hardened into ritual. But barley tests were not universal. Most of human history left no written papyrus at all. So how did the other 99% of pregnant women across tens of thousands of years actually know? The honest answer is, mostly they didn't need a test. Their bodies told them, loudly, and their communities were paying close attention. The first sign was always the missing blood. Across nearly every culture anthropologists have studied, a woman's own tracking of her menstrual cycle was the earliest and most trusted signal. This sounds almost too simple, but consider what it required. It required women to already understand their own rhythm well enough to notice its absence. That is not primitive. That is sophisticated bodily literacy, passed from mother to daughter, aunt to niece, for as long as humans have lived in groups. The anthropologist Beverly Strassman spent years living among the Dogon people of Mali, documenting something remarkable. Dogon women track their reproductive cycles with such precision that they physically separate themselves during menstruation, moving to designated huts, a practice tied directly to their intimate communal knowledge of their own bodies. Strassman's research showed that in societies without calendars, without apps, without a single piece of plastic, women were still extraordinarily accurate at knowing where they stood in their own cycle. A missed period was not a mystery, it was data, tracked by the person living inside the body producing it. Think about how different that is from the way most people relate to their bodies today. You may not know on any given morning exactly what day of your cycle you are in. Many people rely on an app to tell them. But an app is just a modern stand-in for something women once tracked entirely in their own minds, against the backdrop of moon phases, seasons, and the rhythms of daily work. The knowledge was internal. The record-keeping was internal too. Then came the second wave of signs: nausea, exhaustion, tender, swelling breasts, food that once smelled fine suddenly turning the stomach. These symptoms have likely accompanied human pregnancy for as long as human pregnancy has existed, because the underlying biology has not changed. Estrogen and progesterone surge. The body reorganizes itself around a second life. Ancient women didn't need a word for progesterone to feel its effects. They just felt different, and they had grandmothers and midwives to tell them what different usually meant. This is where oral knowledge did the heaviest lifting. In small foraging and farming communities,
Older women were the walking archive. A grandmother had likely witnessed dozens of pregnancies. She knew the early tells, the particular tiredness, the way a woman's skin sometimes changed, the subtle shift in how she carried herself. This knowledge rarely got written down because it didn't need to be. It was demonstrated generation after generation by women simply living near each other. Consider what that meant for a young woman noticing the first strange wave of nausea. She was not alone with a mystery symptom and a search engine. She was surrounded by women who had already lived through the exact same sensation multiple times and could name it instantly. Community was the diagnostic tool. Proximity to older women was, in a very real sense, an early warning system. But here is the twist almost nobody expects. For most of history, none of this counted as official confirmation. Not fully. The real, legally and socially recognized moment of pregnancy arrived not with a missed period or morning sickness, or even a swelling belly. It arrived with movement. Historians call it quickening, the moment a woman first feels the fetus move inside her, usually somewhere between the 4th and 5th month. For centuries, in European medical and legal tradition, quickening was treated as the actual beginning of recognized pregnancy. Before that point, a missed cycle could be explained away. Illness, stress, irregularity. Only quickening was undeniable, because only the woman herself could feel it, and only she could report it. The historian Barbara Duden has written extensively about how for hundreds of years, a woman's own testimony about feeling movement was the primary form of pregnancy confirmation available to doctors, priests, and courts. Physicians did not have ultrasounds. They had no reliable external method at all. So the earliest intimate biological event, a life beginning to move, was also, paradoxically, the only evidence anyone would formally accept. Your body was the instrument, your word was the readout. Think about what that means. For the vast majority of the roughly 300,000 years modern humans have existed, pregnancy was not confirmed by an external device. It was confirmed by trust. Trust in a woman's report of her missing blood. Trust in her description of nausea and fatigue. Trust, eventually, in her account of a flutter that no one else could feel.
That trust was not always honored fairly. Throughout history, women's reports of their own bodies were sometimes doubted, dismissed, or overridden by men who had never experienced any of it. Legal systems built entire frameworks around quickening precisely because it removed ambiguity from a woman's earlier claims. Before quickening, her word alone was often treated as insufficient. After it, her word became, oddly, the entire basis of law. Isn't it strange that the same testimony could be dismissed at one stage and treated as absolute proof at another? But the underlying biological reality never changed. The knowledge was always there inside the person carrying it, long before any external test existed to validate it. What changed across history was who was allowed to believe it. The Egyptians and the Dogon are not isolated examples either. Traditional healers across many cultures developed their own parallel systems long before any of them could compare notes. In parts of medieval Europe, midwives observed changes in the color and fullness of a woman's veins, particularly around the breasts, as an early sign of pregnancy, centuries before anyone understood the vascular changes driving that shift. In other traditions, healers watched for changes in the eyes, the skin, even the way a woman walked, cataloging subtle physical differences that, again, map onto real hormonal and circulatory changes we can now explain in a laboratory. None of these observers were guessing randomly. They were pattern matching against thousands of prior pregnancies, refining their observations the same way any scientist refines a hypothesis, just without the language of science to describe what they were doing. What is remarkable is how consistently these separate traditions converged on the same underlying truths, even without contact with one another. A community in Mesoamerica and a community in West Africa, with no shared history, no shared language, and no shared texts, both arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about the early physical signs of pregnancy. That convergence is itself a kind of evidence. It suggests these were not arbitrary cultural stories layered onto biology. They were biology, observed carefully enough, for long enough, that the pattern became undeniable no matter where on the planet you were standing.
Now think about that plastic stick again. It measures a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, first isolated in a laboratory less than a century ago. Before that isolation, researchers in the early 20th century relied on an even stranger method, injecting a woman's urine into live animals, usually rabbits or frogs, and watching for a physical reaction that indicated pregnancy. It sounds almost as unusual as soaking grain in a bag. The animal test gave doctors a faster, more reliable answer than waiting for quickening ever could. It also, for the first time, moved the confirmation of pregnancy outside of the woman's own body and into a laboratory, a shift that quietly reshaped who got to declare a pregnancy real. Today's test removed the animals, then removed the laboratory too. It gives you an answer in minutes instead of months. It removed the guesswork, the folklore, the waiting for quickening. In many ways, that is an extraordinary gift. You no longer have to wait for movement to know that movement is coming, but strip away the plastic, and you are doing something remarkably similar to what a woman in ancient Egypt did with 2 small bags of grain, or what a Dogon woman does when she tracks her own cycle without writing a single number down. You are reading your body for a signal it has always been sending. The tools have changed almost completely. The signal has not changed at all. And maybe that is the real reframe here. You might assume that modern science replaced ancient instinct, that the test in your bathroom cabinet made older forms of knowing obsolete. But the test doesn't create the signal. It only reads it faster. The hormone was always there. The missing blood was always there. The tiredness was always there. What changed is how quickly and by whom that signal gets translated into certainty. So the next time you or someone you love waits on that answer, remember that the wait itself is ancient. The plastic is new. The tiredness, the missing blood, the subtle shift only the body itself can feel first. That is the same experience echoing forward from a woman who once watched 2 small bags of grain, wondering which one would sprout first.